The night my brother tried to have me arrested, I was wearing a red dress and holding a champagne glass I didn't plan to drink. I remember that detail because the glass was shaking in my hand, not from fear, but from the effort of keeping my composure while my own family smiled like they had already buried me. If you had walked into the ballroom that evening, you would have thought it was a celebration. Crystal chandeliers. Soft piano music. Waiters gliding between tables. My parents standing proudly beside my older brother as if he had just conquered the world. In a way, he thought he had. What no one in that room knew, except me, was that the empire they were celebrating had been built on my silence. And I had decided that night I was done being quiet. My name is Alina Reed. I'm 27 years old. And for most of my life, I was the invisible daughter. You'd think invisibility is something magical. It isn't. It's exhausting. It means speaking and watching people talk over you. It means achieving something and hearing, "That's nice, sweetheart," before the attention shifts back to someone else. It means learning very young that if you want love, you have to deserve it. My brother, Marcus, never had to deserve anything. He was 2 years older than me, tall, confident, loud in a way that made adults laugh. My parents adored him. My mother used to say, "Marcus is going to run the world one day." I used to wonder what that made me. The first time I realized I wasn't the favorite, I was 8. I had won a regional art competition at school. It wasn't huge, just a local event, but to me, it felt like I had climbed Everest. I remember running home with the ribbon in my hand, heart pounding, rehearsing how I'd tell my parents. When I burst into the kitchen, they were arguing. Not with each other. With Marcus. He had broken a neighbor's window playing baseball, and the neighbor had threatened to call the police. My father was furious. My mother was crying. Marcus looked bored. I stood there for a full minute before my mother noticed me. "What is it, Alina?" she asked distractedly. "I won," I said, holding up the ribbon. "That's lovely," she replied, already turning back to Marcus. "Go put it in your room." That was it. No hug. No "I'm proud of you." No looking at my painting. I went upstairs and pinned the ribbon to my wall. I told myself it didn't matter. That was the first lie I ever told myself. Growing up in our house meant understanding unspoken rules. Rule number 1, Marcus's mistakes were accidents. Mine were disappointments. Rule number 2, Marcus needed support. I needed to be strong. Rule number 3, never compete with him. You will lose even if you win. By the time I was 16, I had learned to shrink myself. I dressed simply. I spoke carefully. I brought home perfect grades because excellence was the only language my parents understood, and even then, it came with conditions. When Marcus barely passed his exams, they hired tutors. When I ranked top of my class, my father said, "Good. That's expected." Expected. I carried that word like a stone in my chest. But here's the part no one talks about when they tell stories about overlooked daughters. We don't just become quiet. We become observant. I noticed everything. I noticed how my father's construction business was struggling, even though he pretended it wasn't. I noticed how Marcus spent money he didn't have. I noticed how my mother avoided looking at financial statements. And I noticed something else too. I was good with numbers. Not just good, exceptional. Math made sense in a way people didn't. Numbers didn't play favorites. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't love one child more than the other. If something didn't add up, it was because it truly didn't add up. There was comfort in that. The scholarship letter arrived when I was 17. Full ride. Business analytics. Prestigious university. Far away. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it, as if the paper itself might disappear. When I told my parents, my mother gasped. That's wonderful, she said. My father nodded. Good opportunity. Marcus shrugged. Don't get arrogant. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, realizing something that terrified me. If I left, no one would stop me. And if no one tried to stop me, did that mean I had never really belonged there? College was the first place I felt visible. Professors listened when I spoke. Classmates asked for my help. My ideas weren't expected, they were valued. For the first time in my life, I wasn't someone's sister. I was Alina. I worked part-time. I interned at a small investment firm during my second year. By graduation, I had 3 job offers. When I called home to tell them, my mother sounded distracted. Marcus had launched a startup. My parents had invested heavily in it. It's going to be huge, she said proudly. You should come work with him. I stared at my phone. Why would I do that? His family, she replied, as if that answered everything. Family. A word that had always felt more like an obligation than a comfort. I didn't join Marcus. Instead, I took a job in the city. Long hours. Brutal competition. High stakes. I thrived. Within 4 years, I was leading major projects. Within 5, I had enough savings to invest privately. And here's where the story shifts. Because while I was building something solid, something real, Marcus was building something loud. His startup attracted attention. Flashy presentations. Big promises. Investors impressed by confidence more than content. But every time I looked at the numbers he bragged about online, they didn't add up. Revenue projections inflated. Expense reports vague. Growth statistics suspiciously rounded. At first, I told myself it wasn't my business. Then my father called. Alina, he said, voice tight, Marcus needs temporary liquidity. Just until the next funding round. Could you help? There it was. Not how are you? Not we're proud of you. Just help him. I closed my eyes. How much? I asked. The number he gave me made my stomach drop. That wasn't temporary liquidity. That was desperation. I flew home 2 weeks later. The house looked the same. The walls still held Marcus's trophies. My art ribbon was long gone. At dinner, Marcus talked non-stop about expansion, partnerships, market dominance. I listened. And I calculated. When I asked specific questions about burn rate, about debt structure, about investor agreements, his jaw tightened. You don't trust me? He asked sharply. It's not about trust, I replied calmly. It's about math. My father slammed his fork down. Don't interrogate him in his own house. I almost laughed. His own house. Technically, it was still my parents'. But Marcus had always been treated like the heir. That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom and opened my laptop. I ran numbers based on the limited information I had. And what I found made my blood run cold. Marcus wasn't just struggling. He was sinking. And he was dragging our parents with him. Which brings us back to the ballroom. The red dress. The champagne glass. The celebration of an empire that was already cracking beneath its own weight. My parents stood on stage beside Marcus as he announced a major merger. Investors applauded. Cameras flashed. I stood in the crowd, heart steady now. Because I had evidence. Real documents. Real transactions. Real proof of financial manipulation. Not illegal, not yet. But dangerously close. When Marcus finished speaking, he invited my father to join him at the podium. None of this would be possible without my family, he said dramatically. I felt something inside me shift. 4 years, I had stayed quiet to protect them. But silence was no longer protection. It was permission. And I was done giving it. I placed my champagne glass on a passing tray. And I started walking toward the stage. If you think this is the part where I crumble, you don't know me very well. I wasn't walking up there as the invisible daughter anymore. I was walking up there as the only person in that room who knew the truth. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being seen. I have replayed that walk to the stage more times than I can count. Not because I regret it, but because it was the exact moment my life split into before and after. Before, I was the quiet daughter who cleaned up messes silently. After, I became the woman who refused to drown with the ship. The ballroom lights felt hotter as I approached the stage. The music had faded. Applause still echoed from Marcus's announcement. He stood there in his tailored navy suit, smiling like a king who had just secured his throne. Our eyes met. For a second, I saw it, the flicker of irritation. He hadn't invited me up. I wasn't part of the script. My mother noticed me next. Her smile faltered slightly, confusion replacing pride. What is she doing? I saw her mouth to my father. I kept walking. Each step felt steady, deliberate, controlled. This wasn't anger. Anger is messy. This was precision. When I reached the stage, Marcus leaned toward me with a tight grin. "Alina," he whispered through his teeth, "what are you doing?" "Helping," I replied softly. Then I turned toward the microphone. The ballroom quieted. If you've never stood in front of hundreds of people while your entire family silently begs you not to speak, it's a strange kind of clarity. You realize something simple. They're not afraid of you embarrassing them. They're afraid of you telling the truth. "Good evening," I began calmly. My voice didn't shake. That surprised even me. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Alina Reed, Marcus's sister. Polite laughter rippled through the room. Investors smiled. They assumed this was sentimental. Marcus placed a firm hand on my elbow. "Keep it short," he muttered. I gently removed his hand. "I work in financial analytics," I continued. "And over the past few weeks, I've had the privilege of reviewing some very interesting projections related to this exciting merger." Now the room shifted. It was subtle, but noticeable. People who understood numbers sat up straighter. Marcus's jaw tightened. "This isn't the time," he said quietly into the side of his smile. I ignored him. Specifically, I said into the mic, I was curious about the projected 38% growth rate being presented to investors. A man near the front, one of the major backers, frowned slightly. I couldn't reconcile that number with the documented operational losses over the last 3 quarters. Silence. Pure, sharp silence. Marcus stepped forward. "My sister loves spreadsheets," he laughed nervously. "But she doesn't have full access to our internal data." I turned toward him slowly. "I have access to enough." And then I did the thing that changed everything. I connected my phone to the presentation screen. The projector flickered. A spreadsheet appeared. Clean. Organized. Undeniable. Gasps rippled through the room. Marcus's confident posture collapsed into rigid tension. "What is this?" my father demanded from the side. "This," I said calmly, "is a breakdown of the company's actual burn rate compared to the numbers being presented tonight." I highlighted the discrepancies. Inflated revenue. Deferred liabilities disguised as future assets. Short-term loans masked as growth capital. None of it illegal on its own. But together, it painted a picture of a company seconds away from implosion. "You're sabotaging me," Marcus hissed under his breath. "No," I replied quietly. "I'm saving you." Because here's the part no one understood in that moment. If this merger went through based on manipulated projections, the fallout wouldn't just be financial. It would be criminal. And my parents, who had invested nearly everything, would lose not just money, but reputation. The room began buzzing. Investors whispered to each other. Phones appeared in hands. Assistants stepped outside to make calls. Marcus grabbed the microphone. "These numbers are incomplete," he snapped. "She doesn't understand the strategic positioning." I met his gaze. "I understand debt restructuring. I understand liquidity crises. And I understand when projections are being stretched to buy time." My mother stood frozen at the edge of the stage. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Not angry. Scared. Then something happened I didn't expect. One of the senior investors stood up. "Mr. Reed," he said coolly to Marcus, "we're going to need a closed-door discussion." Immediately, the applause from earlier was gone. The celebratory atmosphere dissolved into sharp professionalism. Marcus looked at me as if I had just detonated a bomb. "You've ruined everything," he said, voice low and venomous. "No," I replied evenly. "I stopped it before it ruined you." Security didn't escort me out. No one shouted. But the celebration ended within minutes. Investors moved to a private conference room. My father followed them, pale and tight-lipped. My mother approached me slowly once the crowd thinned. "How could you do that?" she whispered. I blinked at her. "Do what?" "Humiliate your brother." There it was. Not, "Were the numbers wrong?" Not, "Is this true?" Just humiliation. I felt something inside me cool permanently. "I prevented him from committing fraud," I said quietly. She flinched at the word. "Don't exaggerate." "I'm not." Marcus didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. When the meeting finally ended, investors exited stiffly. No smiles. No handshakes. The merger was under review. Which, in corporate language, usually means dead. My father found me near the entrance. His expression wasn't explosive. It was worse. It was disappointed. "You could have handled that privately," he said. "I tried," I replied. Marcus had ignored every warning, every question. "You've always resented him," my father continued. That accusation hit harder than I expected. "I don't resent him," I said slowly. "I resent being asked to clean up his disasters quietly." He didn't respond. Because deep down, he knew it was true. I drove back to my hotel alone that night. No dramatic music. No tears. Just a strange, hollow stillness. I had exposed the truth. I had protected them. And somehow, I was still the villain. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. For years, I had believed that if I just worked hard enough, succeeded quietly enough, helped enough, eventually they would see me. Tonight, they saw me. And they didn't like it. But here's the thing about stepping into the light. Once you've done it, you can't go back to the shadows. My phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m. A message from Marcus. "You think you're smarter than me? Watch what happens next." I stared at the screen for a long moment. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small reading his threats. I felt prepared. Because if Marcus wanted a war, he was finally fighting someone who understood the battlefield better than he did. And I had stopped playing the quiet sister a long time ago. If you think the worst part of exposing someone is the confrontation, it isn't. The worst part is what comes after. The silence. The waiting. The knowledge that a wounded ego is far more dangerous than an open enemy. Marcus had never lost publicly before. And I had taken that from him. By morning, the damage had begun. 3 missed calls from my mother. 1 from my father. 8 messages from Marcus. I didn't open his texts immediately. I already knew the tone. Instead, I checked financial news. There it was. Merger between Reed Innovations and Kessler Tech delayed amid internal review. Delayed. That word would cost him millions. It would cost him credibility. And Marcus cared more about credibility than oxygen. I finally opened his messages. "You blindsided me. You had no right. You don't understand high-level negotiation. You're jealous." Jealous. That word made me laugh out loud in my quiet hotel room. Jealous of what? The pressure? The debt? The performance of perfection? No. I wasn't jealous. I was tired of pretending he was invincible. My phone rang again. This time, I answered. It was my father. What have you done? He asked immediately. Protected you, I replied calmly. You humiliated your brother in front of investors. I prevented those investors from discovering worse. There was a pause. For a split second, I thought he might admit I was right. Instead, he said, you should come home. We need to handle this as a family. Handle this as a family. I almost asked where that family was when I needed support growing up. But I swallowed it. I'll come, I said. Because part of me still hoped, stupidly, that truth would matter more than pride. When I walked into my parents' house that afternoon, the atmosphere felt heavy. Marcus was pacing in the living room. He stopped the second he saw me. You happy? He snapped. I'm not your enemy, I said evenly. You cost me the merger. No, I corrected. Your numbers did. He laughed sharply. You think business is just spreadsheets. You think confidence doesn't matter. Confidence built on lies collapses. That was the wrong thing to say. His face darkened. You always thought you were better than me. There it was again. That narrative. The overlooked sister secretly plotting superiority. You were given everything, I said quietly. I built everything. Our mother stepped between us. Stop this, she pleaded. We are not tearing this family apart. Marcus pointed at me. She already did. The argument lasted hours. Voices raised. Accusations thrown. My father defended Marcus repeatedly. He had a strategy. He needed time. This is how scaling works. Every time I explained the risk, the debt exposure, the potential regulatory audit, the liability tied to my parents' investment, I was told I was overreacting. Until I showed them one more document. A private loan agreement Marcus had signed using the house as collateral. My mother went white. You did what? She whispered. Marcus didn't look at her. It was temporary. How much? My father demanded. The number hung in the air like smoke. It was nearly everything. My mother sat down slowly. For the first time, no one accused me of jealousy. Because now it wasn't about pride. It was about survival. I was going to fix it, Marcus said defensively. With what? I asked. Optimism? He lunged forward slightly, anger flashing. You love this, don't you? Being right. I stared at him. You think this feels good? Because here's the truth no one wanted to admit. I didn't expose him to win. I exposed him because I couldn't watch my parents lose their home for his ego. But somehow, I was still the villain in his story. The real retaliation didn't happen in that living room. It happened 2 days later. I was back in the city when my assistant rushed into my office. There's a legal notice here for you. My stomach tightened. It was a formal complaint. Marcus was accusing me of corporate interference and defamation. My own brother. He was claiming I had misrepresented private financial data to sabotage his company. I read it twice. Slowly. Carefully. Then I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. He wasn't just angry. He was desperate. And desperate people make reckless moves. I called him immediately. You're suing me? I asked calmly. I'm protecting my company, he replied coldly. By dragging this into court? You forced my hand. No, I said softly. You're trying to scare me. Silence. He knew I wasn't wrong. You think you can walk into my world and control it, he continued. You can't. I almost smiled. His world. Numbers were my world. Risk was my world. And he had just stepped directly into it. I didn't panic. I hired a lawyer within hours. A very good one. When she reviewed the complaint, she raised an eyebrow. "He's bluffing," she said. "He has no grounds unless your data is falsified." "It isn't." "Then he's trying to intimidate you into retracting your statements." That sounded exactly like Marcus. Control the narrative. Silence the threat. Only this time, I wasn't 8 years old holding a ribbon in the kitchen. I wasn't going to shrink. The media caught wind of the dispute within days. Headlines shifted. Sibling power struggle threatens Reed Innovations. Financial analyst sister challenges CEO brother. The story became bigger than either of us. Investors grew nervous. Auditors began circling. And that's when Marcus realized something terrifying. By attacking me publicly, he had invited scrutiny he couldn't control. My mother called late one night. Her voice was tired. "Can you stop this?" she asked. "I didn't start it," I replied. "He says you're trying to destroy him." I closed my eyes. "I'm trying to prevent him from destroying all of you." There was a long pause. Then, quietly, she asked, "If you hadn't said anything, would it really have been that bad?" "Yes," I answered immediately. And for the first time, she believed me. I could hear it in her silence. But belief doesn't fix damage. Within weeks, the company faced a formal audit. The merger partner withdrew completely. Marcus's board demanded transparency. Pressure mounted from every direction. And then he did something I didn't anticipate. He called me. Not angry. Not threatening. Defeated. "I need your help," he said. Those 4 words carried 20 years of history. He had never asked for my help. He had demanded it. Expected it. But never asked. I didn't answer right away. Because helping him would mean stepping fully into the fire. It would mean cleaning up the mess publicly. Again. But this time, the cost wouldn't be invisibility. It would be ownership. And ownership meant something different. It meant if I stepped in, I would no longer be the supporting character in his story. I would become the one holding the future. On one condition, I finally said. "What?" he asked, voice tight. "No more lies." Silence. Then, quietly, "Fine." I didn't know yet whether that word meant surrender. Or the beginning of something even more complicated. But I knew one thing with certainty. The war between us was no longer about favoritism. It was about legacy. And I had no intention of letting mine be written in the margins. The audit confirms what Alina warned about. Marcus had overstated projections and buried risky debt. It wasn't outright fraud, but it was dangerously close. Investors lose confidence. The board calls an emergency meeting. Alina presents a realistic recovery strategy: debt restructuring, asset liquidation, operational downsizing, and transparent reporting. For the first time, the board listens to her not as Marcus's sister, but as the most qualified mind in the room. Their father finally sees the full risk Marcus created. The power dynamic begins to shift. Under pressure from investors and the board, Marcus is removed as CEO. The decision shatters him. He accuses Alina of betrayal, of stealing his position. But this time, their parents don't defend him blindly. They are hurt. Yes, but they understand the consequences. Marcus spirals emotionally. His confidence, once his greatest weapon, becomes fragile. Alina doesn't celebrate. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about preventing total destruction. Months later, the company stabilizes under new leadership, guided quietly by Alina's strategy. The house is no longer at risk. Debt is under control. Marcus slowly begins rebuilding, not as a star, but as a learner. One evening, he finally admits the truth. He was afraid of failing. And he thought confidence would protect him. Alina realizes something important: they were both shaped by expectations. She doesn't become the new golden child. She doesn't seek revenge. She keeps her boundaries. And for the first time in her life, she is seen not as less than or better than, just equal. The invisible daughter becomes the architect of the family's survival. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently.